experience. What is FOSSome? People who are actually very positive for open source, I actually defined it. It's either to do something that positively benefits or being of the nature of positively benefiting the free open source software community. The people who are willing to help you in the free open source software community, generally speaking, have no interest whatsoever in profiting off of your computing experience. That sort of altruism is necessary in large environments. There's this common misconception in the free open source software community, people who aren't technical aren't important. And I can say, without a doubt, that is wrong. We've got a lot of coders. And there are things that coders cannot / should not do. Here's a perfect example of exactly why having nothing but coders can actually turn out very wrong. Lime on salmon, good on fish. But this is actual documentation for NTP. Well, first off, it's hard to read. Second off, it's hard to read. They don't have any idea of formatting. And initially that sounds unimportant, but it's really not. In fact, I just had a struggle recently trying to get voice recognition working in Linux. In Windows and in Mac, voice recognition they've had for years, and it's getting better all the time. In Linux, it is almost non-existent. It's not because there's lack of effort or lack of brain power. Actually, I think the problem is there's too much brain power. Carnegie Mellon University has this incredibly powerful voice recognition software called Sphinx. And believe me, it's awesome, but I can't get it to work. And I've been using Linux for years and years and years. Their idea of a tutorial is 20 pages long, and no average user is even going to bother going through the first page. And especially with no screenshots, like this is just dense text going on about voice recognition theory. If this is the best that the Linux community has to offer, then clearly we need to take a new approach. And that approach is not looking at the source and not settling for extremely verbose technical discussions. At some point, you actually have to bring it down to real people. Looking at the source code should never be required. A lot of times you're better off never seeing the code, because sometimes a program which is actually leading in its field has some of the hackiest code ever. When someone sends my company a fax, what happens is that actually goes to TELUS, and TELUS emails a multi-page image. In Linux, you can't really just open that in any image viewer. The way they've been doing it, and have been doing it for years, as I found out, is they open it in GIMP, manually resize every single page, and then would print off each page individually. We've got a VP of sales who has clearly better things to be doing. One day I got pulled aside. She's like, I'm so sorry to dump this task on you, but I've got this 20-page contract, and I really don't have the time to stretch all these out. What I'd always done was just tossed it through ImageMagick for the 1 or 2 faxes I'd ever gotten. Her perspective is the current process is too complicated. All I had to do was make a simple shell script, and I just used a little front end, so you just pick your file, and it converts it to PDF, all pre-stretched and everything. It takes you, like, not even 30 seconds. That's an insight that it would never occur to me that, oh, hey, this might be a real problem for other people, and they probably don't know how to do this themselves. Having the perspective of, I don't know how to use this, and the process is too complicated, that's a good one to have, because 20 years of experience won't let you look for simple solutions. So most free open source software, a lot of it is actually fairly decent. Some of it, some of the best. There's the Google Chrome web browser and Firefox. By those browsers actually becoming larger in market share, that forces designers of websites to actually make sure that those browsers work and that those websites are using open standards. Anyone who tries to open up a web page that was made in like 97, those pages are pretty much broken until someone steps in and fixes them. Definitely using open standard file formats, using Firefox, using OpenOffice, these things are key. You can offer your time. Any project worth their salt will find something for you to do. And a lot of times it's as simple as asking, what do you need me to do? I don't know anything, what do you need me to do? There's currently a multimedia program that I work for, and there's a guy who's always there. He doesn't know the code, he doesn't know any of that, but he stays in the IRC chat. What information do you need? And he'll just search Google for it, and here you go. Well, that saved me 5 minutes, and he's happy that he could help. And also, again, by him not knowing the code, not even really knowing much, when we put in a fix, does this look right? No, complicated. Well, that's good to know. It really is. We always hear, I am not a lawyer, I am not a lawyer, I am not a lawyer. Well, If you are a lawyer, there's actually lots of law groups coming into being in the open source community. They're starting to make some real ground, and they work in conjunction with, say, the Free Software Foundation or the Electronic Freedom Foundation. Open source needs lawyers, and it needs advocates outside of the technical sphere. There's been so many patent battles in open source. If there weren't lawyers out there protecting open source, it would have crumbled very early on. Anyone here artistic? Anyone with half a sense of aesthetics can look at that and say that is ugly and should not ever exist ever. I actually know quite a few open source people who are colorblind, literally. KDE has actually benefited greatly because they've brought in a lot of arty people. That's why KDE 4 quite simply knocks the socks off of, I mean, I'm a hardcore GNOME user, but I'm not going to deny that KDE 4 is way prettier. I think actually that's going to benefit it greatly in the long run. You will probably have to stand your ground because technical people are stubborn and they think what they draw is nice. It is not. Even in my own company, hearing from the graphic designer who makes these really awesome business cards, she came up with some really cool stickers for us. You have to stand up for your artistic integrity and say, no, this is how it's going to have to be. People who can speak multiple languages, we need translators. If you're even like me, I don't speak any other languages, and I've contributed to the Canadian English translations. We need more writers, period. The documentation for most Linux projects is wholly inadequate. It's very rare I see a project where not only do they have decent documentation that's also up to date, documentation that's also been copy edited, documentation that is in formats if you do it in DocBook or something so that you can put it to a PDF or you can print it, all those other things which are very necessary. Like, we need real writers. Code documentation is not documentation. Doxygen is nice and it's very handy when you need to know the API, but it is not documentation. I'm so sick of projects saying, oh, we've got it documented, don't worry about it. Actually, if you're a writer, you'll probably actually want to check that internal documentation as well, because helping programmers be more succinct is a very important skill. You don't even have to work with the project. If you want to write something about KDE, but you don't want to work with KDE, for whatever reason, you know, some groups like the Linux Documentation Project, which used to be fantastic, now it's really old and it's actually at a standstill with internal politics. You can document things on your own blog. Linux.com actually has this really cool new setup where you can blog to your heart's content, especially because it's Linux.com. Anything you write concerning Linux generally shows up pretty high. Even if it's a simple, hey, I found this neat trick with Screen, there it is. Even forums, linuxquestions.org is really handy. Money. You know, some of us are able to get jobs and whatnot, but some people actually make their living off of free open source software, as weird as that sounds. But, you know, the maintainer of Slackware, his job and how he does his life is based almost entirely off of Slackware subscriptions. And he gives Slackware away for free, but when he got sick, it was those Slackware contributions that kept him alive, more or less. And one other thing is encouragement. There's nothing like working your butt off in open source for years and years and years, and then you get that one email which confirms why you're doing it. It can be a person who sends you an email in broken Romanian, which was my case, but I fixed their printer problem and it made all the difference to them. Simply saying thanks, I would encourage